Hello, welcome back to the No Way Jose podcast. Today I have Matt Wolfson joining me again for another of our weekly Wolfsons. We'll be digging into the UAE, Israel, their relationship, how that ties into the U.S. and their major partnerships around the world. Kind of a UAE Israel dialectic of sorts. We'll be talking about all that and more. Now, if you like seeing this show, be sure to hit that subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications. That way you can see when we're dropping new videos and when we're going live. With that, we'll see you in the show.
No way, Jose.
The following footage proves beyond any doubt that the tanks intentionally set the house on fire. It proves that the Branch Davidians were murdered. You can see that this tank has a gas jet on the front that shoots fire. You can also see the fire quite plainly. The tank goes into the house twice, and each time as it backs out, the fire at the gas jets is plainly visible.
We must all do more to recognize and look for the early warning signals that deeply troubled young people send.
Hello, Matt. Welcome back to the show. Pleasure to have you. I believe this will be about the third time or so I think that we talk about the UAE, and I think it's the third time that we've tried to talk about the UAE, but third time's a charm. Although it seems like we're kind of very much a similar situation since the last time we talked. I guess it's sort of behind the paywall for any of the patrons who want to go check it out. We only made it to about 30 minutes. But we already talked about this a little bit. Third time's a charm. But we talk about UAE again, same situation basically. Last time I believe there was, I think we talked about a week ago, or we were kind of this angling for some sort of peace situation, kind of a little bit of a stalemate is kind of the feeling on the world stage. Things are a little bit more hopeful, I would say, since the last time we talked. Things are looking up, looking like the forces that are forcing it towards the inevitability having to come to some sort of terms with Iran. Although UAE is one of those characters, they've kind of been doing weird stuff in the periphery, and a lot of people haven't been paying attention to what they've been doing. And they're a character we should sort of keep an eye on, especially if we're trying to get a grip on like how things are going to form out in the aftermath of all this. Are they going to be Israel's kind of rotten little brother who kind of does mischief for them, essentially screwing up this whole deal? I mean, we're not quite sure, but this is I do think it's worthwhile getting a grip on UAE, seeming like it is very much one of Zog's puppet states over there. But you wrote another piece. I guess one thing too before I guess a question, on this. I think it's worthwhile defining terms within your piece that we're talking about under. Over at Mayadeen, you have under Western media cover the UAE and Israel's divide and conquer, MENA. I don't know if people usually pronounce that as MENA. I thought maybe at least be worthwhile, especially since we have more of an American audience here. I know that's more of a Middle Eastern audience, at least define terms. It kind of is self-explanatory, what Middle East, North Africa, I think, or something like that. But people should at least get familiar with that. But, I mean, if you do want to kind of give a little bit of rhetorical context, and then also from there, I guess, kind of give your reasoning for digging into the UAE fiasco once again.
Thanks. It's great to be here as always. It is. You're right. It's Middle East, North Africa, and normally I would I would put it in parentheses, but I'm writing for Mayadeen, which is in Lebanon, which is in Beirut, which has been, they've had correspondents, I mentioned this in the past, killed by Israel's bombs in the last couple of months. And MENA and what it means, and the UAE's and Israel's incursions are familiar topics to them. The reason I wanted to write about the UAE, I'd written about it for the Libertarian Institute in March and April, and we talked about it some. The reason I wanted to go back to it is I was reading a lot of, and the piece starts out with this, I was reading a lot of Western sort of mainstream media, liberal reportage, I guess, the New York Times, the Financial Times in England, the Economist, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, with pieces whose logic, one way or another, finds their way to the Joe Rogan show, to, cited by a senator who then, is featured, his speech is featured on the Sean Ryan show. The kind of mainstream, slightly alt, but like basically mainstream podcast Republican, obviously Fox, which is uber mainstream Republican, has this view to the spades. But the view that keeps being bandied about is that, Israel might have made a mistake in going into this war and leading the United States into this war, but Iran is the real problem. Iran is a theocracy. It bottled up the Strait of Hormuz. It stopped global shipping. Iran has human rights problems. Iran has, it's Iran. And if you actually look at the last 16, 17, 18 years of history, whatever you think about Iran, and, I'm very glad they defended their sovereignty, and I'm glad it's ended the way it did. But, for a whole host of reasons. But if you actually look at, the history, no matter what you think of Iran, whether you think it's, a theocracy, an authoritarian, horrible, or a misunderstood regime, and one that's very workable, whatever you think, it seems pretty clear to me, based on the facts, that Israel and the UAE were really the main cause of the problems we've seen, which is the rise of Hamas, the rise of Hezbollah, Iran being more aggressive, which led to the October 7th attacks, which led to the Iran war and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And, the common story about this is, the United States invaded Iraq and Iran got more powerful, and then it had the Hezbollah militia, and then it had Syria, and then it had Hamas, and, it was threatening Israel. And that's caused all of this, and that caused October 7th. But if you actually look at the years after the invasion of Iraq, particularly beginning in 2009, when the UAE got a new president, Sheikh Mohammed, its hereditary leader, and who inherited it from his brother, who'd inherited it from his father, and Israel got Bibi Netanyahu in power. So that's 2009. Since then, Israel and the UAE have been astonishingly aggressive in the Middle East. They've invaded, whether through actual military action in places like Yemen, in Qatar, in Libya, via proxy armies, in Sudan, or via commercial investment, essentially forced commercial investment to very poor places, throughout Africa, in Armenia and Azerbaijan. What they've done is in Syria now, in aspects of Lebanon and Morocco, what they've done is invaded the sovereignty of Middle Eastern countries with big business, not like small business, not like helping your ordinary person, conglomerates setting up shop there off deals with politicians, or with armies or proxy wars or sponsored coups against any Muslim style of political party that wants to take control. And by that, I mean, Hamas is in many ways, it's a political organization, but it's a very strong military wing. The Muslim Brotherhood, is a very different kind of organization. Both, though, were democratically elected. Hezbollah is a different organization still. The IRGC in Iran is different. For Netanyahu and Mohammed, very, very explicitly, and they have the ear of U.S. policymakers, and in many ways they have the ear of mainstream media, sort of across the political spectrum. For them, all political Islam is the same. All political Islam is bad. We have to exterminate all of it. And that's what they've been trying to do for the last 15, 16 years, either by force or by commercial development, which brings secularization. And when you look at that trajectory, what Iran has done, what Hezbollah has done, what Hamas has done, it looks a lot more like defending the sovereignty of their various countries and their way of life from incursions than it does like, taking advantage of Iraq to get more powerful in the Middle East for, 20 years. But that's a narrative that's really not told. I mean, I'm not trying to sing, or I'm not trying to promote myself here. I'm the only journalist I know of who's written 3 pieces about the UAE's incursions globally and in America that sort of treat them comprehensively. I'm the only American journalist I know. And there may be others, I just have never seen them. And I was shocked, and the UAE's sponsorship the UAE is Israel's biggest ally and has been since around 2009 outside of America. And the UAE is sponsored by Israel, and both of them are underwritten by America. And this is a totally, essentially unknown story in media. Now, it's not an unknown story in academia. I mean, I cite here and in the other pieces scholars, who I've heard speak, who I follow on Twitter, they follow me, who actually have studied this and they know what's going on. But this doesn't make it into the media because the media actually has a lot of connections to Zionists in Israel. That's a lot of the ownership. And the media is very invested in listening to sources from Washington, D.C., who pretty much take the UAE and Israel's line. So I thought this piece, I'd written 2 pieces we talked about the UAE's rise, what it was doing in Africa globally. But what this piece was meant to show is, look, like the Western media is covering something up purposefully or not, or sort of half purposely, half not, about this war, the Iran war, which is that Iran didn't cause it. This wasn't Israel doing a just response. If you look at the longer context, this was the UAE and Israel aggressing across the region. Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran, and Yemen, and several other places, Muslim Brotherhood, defending themselves, and then that backlash gives Israel the excuse to push us into this disastrous war. So that's the point of the piece. It was to change the narrative and to show the people who were peddling what I consider to be a really false one.
Yeah. Now, in previous, pieces that you've written on UAE, I know in one of them you took time to kind of explore the history of the UAE. And this one you did, but in a different way. You took the modern figures between the UAE and Netanyahu, and took a little bit of an effort, or a little bit of set aside a little time in your piece to kind of take a little cursory dig into their backgrounds, particularly Netanyahu, which I find that to be an interesting little dig, because even amongst those that are pretty well pretty well informed on this issue, on this front, I'd say not a lot of people really actually have any sort of extensive understanding, or even more than just a cursory understanding of Netanyahu's upbringing. I mean, I know some of us kind of are aware, and kind of make jeers at the fact that he was born in Pennsylvania. I believe he even had like a name change. It was a lot more American. But anyways, just stuff like that. But those are just more kind of surface level things. Kind of fun little meme things to know about Netanyahu. Kind of online anti-Semitism points, essentially, like or trivia is essentially what that is. But I don't think a whole lot of people know too much about him. But I think once you understand his background, it does kind of inform how he's governing in this current situation, especially in regards, as you were kind of laying down, to the Islamic political factions in the region, which is kind of a unique situation they have going on with the UAE. And I also think it's interesting to kind of think about the idea that Netanyahu is, I think, mostly known as being secular. And so, like, this is, you would think that, I don't know, maybe not necessarily friendly with Islam, but it shouldn't be, like, fervently against them. I think maybe there's an interesting topic about, like, what it even means to be a Jew, I guess. Since that is, like, I think in some regards part and parcel to being a Jew, and I guess it's not literally, at least how he would believe it. This anti-Islam through line, which is kind of ironic when I don't even think he's necessarily even religious. But I do think Jewishness or Judaism is kind of this unique thing where even if it's identified as an ethnic group, those who choose to do that, it is even still an ethnic group that's born out of a belief system. So that inherently is going to have its own problems. So I know I threw a lot at you there, but I just think it's kind of interesting understanding how these people are governing and just kind of the belief systems kind of in the background of it all and how that informs how they're behaving.
I think you're completely right, and I appreciate it because I think connecting Netanyahu's religiousness to what he's doing or irreligiousness to what he's doing is pretty key. What I would say is that Netanyahu comes via his father, who's a very hardline Zionist. I mean, there are different forms of Zionists, just like there are different forms of Jews. Benzion Netanyahu, who was an academic, was such a hardline Zionist that he couldn't find work in Tel Aviv in the 1950s. And he actually ended up in America at several universities, including Cornell. And Benjamin Netanyahu, the son, went to MIT and then worked at BCG with Mitt Romney, one of the major consulting firms in the Massachusetts area. And Benzion, the father, and this went throughout his academic work, had a very bottom line view of what it meant to be Jewish. And what it meant to him is that Muslims and Christians would always hate you no matter what you did. I mean, his seminal work was a revisionist history of the Spanish Inquisition against Jews. And many people said, and I say this in the piece, many people said that a lot of Jews had converted to Catholicism, but they were still secretly practicing Judaism, and that's why, they were singled out by the authorities. Benzion
conversos, yeah.
Benzion Netanyahu said, no, they weren't. They had actually converted and were faithfully Catholicism, and they were still persecuted. And that's, when you hear people like, I'm going to forget the name now, one of the, I think Josh somebody on the right, saying things like anti-Semitism is built into Europe's DNA. That's the very sort of hardline Zionist. We need Israel. And not only do we need Israel, but since Israel is surrounded by Islamic countries, they're going to hate us anyway, no matter what we do. And we need the only way, and they don't say this part publicly. They'll say, oh, we need to kill Hamas, Hezbollah. What they don't say publicly is the only way for us to be safe among hostile religions is to secularize them. I mean, the reason that Netanyahu is backing so many commercial developments in the Middle East, North Africa, is to secularize the region because he fundamentally thinks Jews can't be safe as Jews. However they hold their faith, they can't be safe if they're surrounded by believing Muslims. That is what he thinks. Muhammad, who's his partner in that effort, is essentially, and he calls himself a Muslim, but he is a secularist. His father was a secularist. He's very close to the West. They make their money off selling oil to the West. Now they make their money around investing in the West. And all of that comes at the expense of Islamic societies. You're letting foreign influences in, Abu Dhabi and Dubai are known as in the UAE are known as the most cosmopolitan, particularly Dubai, sitting in the Middle East, arguably. And so when they let these people, when they secularize, they're already doing, Muhammad is already doing things that are secularizing his society. And he doesn't want the Islamists to call him out or the Islamists across the region. And so he wants any form of political Islam gone too. And I think it's because they believe it, but it's also a helpful selling point to say all forms of Islam are the same. They're always going to hate us. We got to either bomb them or, sell them energy investment and McDonald's and, clubs and get the women out of the burqas and into the short skirts. that's the only way we can survive. And I think that's really the logic of both of them, and there's huge amounts of debate, and people I know have very different opinions across the spectrum who are pro-Palestinian and anti-Israel about, what is Jewish supremacy? Does Jewish supremacy exist in all Jews? Where does it exist? The argument I'd make here is that, I would say somebody like Netanyahu is a Jewish supremacist. And what that means is he thinks the only way the Jews can survive, they can't live peacefully with anybody. They've got to dominate. They've got to secularize, and they've got to beat the shit out of other societies, or they cannot survive. And that is not the definition of Jewish supremacy everyone has. That is the definition I'm now working with currently, because it seems to explain the kind of bizarre extremism we're currently seeing. The stunning thing about the UAE and Israel, and I say this in the piece, is that they have gotten so far outside in terms of these various incursions and bombings and now attacking Iran. And the UAE attacked Iran too. They've gotten so far outside any normal approach to the region that the Saudis, who used to be their ally, is backing away. The Saudis are coming closer to Pakistan. They're coming closer to Qatar. They're coming closer to Turkey. They've really alienated themselves. And I think the reason is because they don't think they have another option. And I think the other reason is both countries have really good relationships with the United States right now, and the media looks the other way, and they think that they can survive this no matter what they do.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing that I noticed throughout this piece, and you kind of are saying it with the title, the UAE divide and conquer, but kind of said in another way, like as I said, this title, the UAE Israel dialectic. I think essentially having these two, puppet states. You can you can debate on who's a puppet, who's a puppeteer, or whatever. But either way, they're working in tandem, and these are entities that have no problem whatsoever operating in a duplicitous nature. This kind of opens up for all sorts of scams. Once you get another person in on the scam or trying to evoke certain reactions, this is where I'm kind of speaking like a dialectic. This gives you another person to get in on the con or to get in on the dialectical play. Essentially, kind of another piece. I know one such example was through OPEC, but I think this relationship leaves open the situation for other such examples. And given how Israel behaves, it just seems like an entity we really should be paying attention to. They're already themselves, Israel, are willing to blow up deals and behave in the most duplicitous way. Now, if you have another third actor entity that is, even behaving in a similar such way, but yet they're not being paid attention to, and they have similar incentives in play, it should alarm you. So it's almost like this shadow actor that
Yes.
kind of this look at the right hand as the left hand's doing this. So if you just want to lay out some of that dynamic, maybe other such examples, or even just the OPEC one, or if this is something you think we should be concerned as well going forward with UAE.
I think you put it better than I did in any of the three pieces, and I wrote them. I gave examples in the pieces. I do think I said the Israel is certainly more than eager to outsource its dirty work to the UAE in places like Sudan, in places like Somalia, where the UAE has gotten really criticized for, essentially sponsoring genocides, via, arming civil wars where they arm secularists against what they see as Islamists. And much of this works to the benefit of Israel. The most obvious recent one was, the UAE has had a relationship in Somalia for 15 years where it's been helping its government. It bought a port, a major port in a province called Somaliland. But it had been helping Somalia's central government. The reason Somalia gave it the port is that it trusted the UAE. Well, the UAE at the beginning of this year essentially involved itself in Somaliland, which has a lot of, it's a province of Somalia, but it has a lot of breakaway tendencies. And it wants to be recognized as a separate country internationally, but it never has. And the UAE was part of brokering a deal, essentially, that where Somaliland recognized Israel to give it credence in the international community. They essentially, what the UAE did is it divided and conquered Somalia by putting Somalia's breakaway province, possible breakaway province, where the UAE owned a port, in an alliance with Israel. And the Somalis were stunned and they broke off all ties with the UAE. But I mean, that's the kind of game the UAE plays. It does, and it does that in Sudan and Libya. I mean, where it's funding militias against Islamists that end up benefiting Israel. It does it in Azerbaijan, where it's investing, in deals in tandem with Israel that benefit Israel, But the UAE, the reason it gets to be the bad little brother is that the UAE doesn't get, as you say, scrutiny. I mean, Israel's been a deal since since it was created. You love it, you hate it, you don't want to touch it. I mean, it's been a major, and that's because Zionists harnessed an enormous amount of American media power and energy to make the case for Israel. That's how they got it to be created in the first place. And so they created this situation where Israel and America have been publicly linked. Well, Israel has to at least pretend it's standing up for human rights in places we can see them. The UAE doesn't. I mean, the UAE is a monarchy. It's purportedly not that close to us, even though it keeps investing more and more money, 2.4 trillion now in data centers, infrastructure, energy, parking meters in Chicago, the NBA, and Paramount Skydance. But we don't, it's also, based on a 2022 report that I cite here, infiltrated, the shit out of us in terms of our lobbying groups, playing on various dark money weaknesses in the system. And nobody's talking about it because it's just this random little country somewhere. And in reality, it's, this is the title Hunter Durrance, the Libertarian Institute, gave to one of my pieces. It's the Frankenstein monster created by the United States and Israel and used by Israel to do its dirty work. To sum up, you're right. The fact the UAE is getting away with a lot, and it's unlike Israel getting no scrutiny.
Yeah, and I think you kind of laid it out perfectly there. You mentioned multiple times, I think Sudan's a great example of this. I know currently right now, I forget exactly the specific ongoing thing going. I guess I probably could Google it real quick if I wanted to. But I know that essentially they're getting ready. I know that recently in the Sudan civil war, there was a big hullabaloo. I believe it was like a few months ago, maybe like 6 or so months ago, where it kind of became this. I don't want to say fun fact, but one of the first examples of I think mass graves being able to be visible from space. They were using satellite photos to essentially identify essentially a mass slaughter that occurred. I don't know if it's necessarily exactly along ethnic lines, so you may not be able to use that hip little genocide term, but it is definitely mass slaughter and tons of people being killed there. And I guess another such situation is shaping up to happen all over again. I guess the forces are essentially surrounding another such similar location, looking like they're about to follow the same exact playbook. And apparently, the coverage I've heard from many people is like, if only there were but just a fraction or just a tiny little minutia of criticism here, perhaps this could actually be stopped. I mean, as you mentioned, how heavily invested UAE is. I mean, this is a relationship we have going both ways, but it seems to be it's like pulling teeth to get anybody to elevate this issue in any way. So it's like we end up with a junior Israel, I guess, if you will. So ending up with the same situation all over again. Which this is another moral hazard. I mean, it's a slightly different region. So, like, are we just creating a future Israel problem and just with a different collective consciousness being formed? I guess maybe the Africans or something. I don't know. I mean, just kind of what your thoughts on all of that? Anything that I just laid out there? I think that is a good example of like a lot of what you're talking about. This like a current ongoing civil war over in Sudan. But that's not even the only example, as you mentioned, multiple other ones as well.
Well, I think that shows why you have your own show and I write, because you're able in a sentence to really put in perspective, verbalizing something that takes me a while to write or put the facts together for. I think a mini Israel in Africa is exactly what we risk seeing. Exactly. The UAE is currently the largest investor in all of Africa. It is larger than the EU. It is larger than China. It is larger than America. And it is doing, and I wrote about this not so much in this piece, but in a piece in March for the Libertarian Institute. It's essentially doing a replay of the extractions for Africa among European empires that, we all condemn of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And I mean, these are real extractions. It's bought up 10% or 20% of the land in 4 African countries for agriculture, or simply to leave sitting there, which allows it to claim that it's conserving land, which then allows it to sell carbon credits in something called a carbon credit scheme to companies that are polluting via, oil and natural gas. What this really does between the agriculture and the clean carbon scheme is to take away arable land. I mean, 10 to 20% in 4 countries. In other countries, it's heavily invested in the illicit diamond smuggling trade. It's Abu Dhabi and Dubai are the largest hubs of illicit diamond, gold, precious mineral smuggling, I think, in the world. And it's funding these militias. I mean, one of the reasons for slaughters, and I think they're genocides in Sudan and the Congo, is because the Democratic Republic of the Congo is because the UAE has sponsored militias in part against Islamists, but in part because they want to get precious minerals on the cheap without paying the government. I mean, they're taking, I linked to a couple reports in an earlier piece that they're taking, an enormous amount out of the ground. And all of these resources could be sold by the governor, by companies, and actually enrich these very impoverished, countries. But what we see here is, one savage tribe is fighting another savage. Well, no, they're not. Like, they're fighting each other because different people are being funded by outsized interests like the UAE, which only goes to reinforce this perception parroted in Western media that, these are a bunch of savages in huts. Well, they're really not. I mean, they're people with traditional, legitimate, varied, complex cultures that have been at the brunt end of technological Western development, first from Europe, then from America, and a bit the USSR, and now from Israel and the UAE, underwritten by America. I mean, we are causing, in Africa is astonishingly fertile. I mean, it's one of the more fertile regions in the world. And that's why, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say the UAE, which is a, sand-swept, dune-filled whatever in fucking, the Gulf states, that's why the UAE is so interested in raping it for resources. And we're letting it get away with it, and we're not telling anyone. And because the UAE is probably, via surveillance technology versus via military action, via actual investment in trade, it is probably the closest ally outside Israel or outside America to Israel. We're letting Israel get away with this too, and nobody's talking about it. And so I don't think there's ever been anything. I started reporting on this in March and found myself, and I think of myself as a fairly well-informed person, but I found myself consulting maps of Africa and stunned by what I don't know. And I think because of that, and I think because when the media reports on it, it just reports on random, reports these slaughters as if they're happening out of nowhere, or, a brief mention to the UAE. none of us are talking about it, even as Africa is getting heavily colonized by Israel, on top of the fact that Israel already has agents in Africa, whether the richest mining baron in the Democratic Republic of the Congo or any number of rich Jewish Zionist South Africans who are linked to Jewish Zionist South Africans like David Sachs, who has the ear of the president in the White House. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I put in the studio chat the two other pieces I wrote. If you want to put them in the chat, just people might have a chance to see. Of everything I've done, and I've written probably, I can't count how many pieces the last 3 years. This is the subject that people know the least about, and it's the most important. So.
Definitely an interesting topic. You mentioned the ongoing endeavors over in Africa. You mentioned earlier in this episode even Somalia, stuff going on over there. Talk about something being overlooked. Obviously it's kind of hard to really force these dots to connect because we really have such a blind spot of what's going on over there. But the dot connector in me definitely feels like it's, I don't know, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if they are connected. For those who aren't aware, in the past, essentially in this current Trump administration, this has been essentially the craziest uptick in the Somali drone war that we've ever seen. I think last year, they got to something 120 something strikes. I think the highest one before that was something like 60, and I think it was Trump's previous administration. And the last year where he got 120, there was actually more drone strikes in Somalia than Biden, Obama, and Bush combined. And they're well on track to beat it again this year. Obviously, we have all the weirdness with Somaliland, the Israel, and you have the UAE being heavily involved in the area. I know there was, perhaps even some, at the time, that last mass slaughter I was talking about with over in Sudan, I know there was even implications that perhaps there could have been some loose connection in some of the stuff going on there. But just to kind of to more buttress your point about, this could actually end up being it's kind of maybe rough to kind of group the whole continent of Africa together in this way. But essentially it's a new sort of Israel, a new sort of crime occurring in front of our eyes. But I just wanted to kind of mention that in hand to kind of buttress your point about what's going on in Africa. If you have something to comment on me, feel free. But the thing I did want to kind of bring our attention to as we kind of bring this towards an end, we've kind of made the point about this being essentially UAE being a dialectical tool of Zog of sorts. This can be applied to one of the greatest things, when we're talking about geopolitics, we're talking about the world powers, the hegemons that are being formed, whether it's a unipolar moment, a bipolar moment, or they're playing a very key role between UAE and Israel in regards to the U.S. relationship to China, which is the next big world power. Always it's kind of interesting. I don't know to what degree this really plays into the thought process here, but I always find it interesting when you get into, the establishment foreign policy. There is a little bit of a divide between this idea of wanting to be essentially far more involved in Israel or wanting Israel to be more of a satellite state that takes care of the region while they take care or get ready for the next big thing in China. So perhaps maybe this could be an attempt at eating their cake and having it too. I'm not entirely sure to what degree that plays in, but a lot of different factors swishing about. But either way, this is a very strong dialectical tool that our masters, or I guess are our masters, but the powers that be have. And if you could just kind of maybe put that a little bit in perspective, kind of what I'm talking about here when it comes to China and how these players might be shaping our future.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think China, I think the rivalry between China and America has been affected by Iran. We've been put in a more dependent position, and I finished the piece with that. Because the Western newspapers and media will frame it as we've been put in a more dependent position, which is true, but they won't frame it as why, which is that the UAE and Israel, both of whom have robust relationships with China, particularly the UAE, to the point where the UAE is possibly could and may be selling technology we give them in AI to China and playing both sides against each other. Israel and the UAE created this situation that forced Trump to go begging hat in hand to China. And they're essentially getting off scot-free. And I do think, I mean, even very, well-known liberal Jewish Zionists like Rahm Emanuel, I mean, even Rahm Emanuel is saying, Israel needs to go it alone more. And I basically agree with you. I think the reason that they're saying this is they want to spend the Trump administration making Israel our proxy and the UAE Israel's proxy in the Middle East, so that, Trump has done a number of things: Lebanon, Syria, Azerbaijan, Armenia, some things in Africa, all of which have functioned to let Israel open up the region. And the Iran war was supposed to help Israel open up Iran. Given that Israel has our technology and will continue to get at least some amount of our weaponry, they in the UAE will be able to plausibly serve as our proxies in the region and allow us to retreat. And I mean, that's one reason that, J.D. Vance is getting backing from all of these Jewish Zionists, Paul Singer, Miriam Adelson. Because even if we take a less interventionist approach, we're still going to have, it could reap benefits for us that Israel and the UAE are very powerful in the region, extracting a lot of resources, have a lot of commercial deals, and we can still have a trading relationship with Israel. It's just will diminish the military relationship. So it looks like our hands are clean when in fact we set them up to do this. And what's happening, I mean, I am not a conspiracist. I'm very careful. I was, and this may work against me sometimes, I don't know. I was academically trained, at pretty high levels. And when I decided to turn my training to write against the establishment, I kept a lot of that training. And a lot of that is, you don't say, well, this means this means this means this, like, right? You have to prove it. There's a difference between saying, they intend to kill us all, and saying, well, the function of what they're doing, I don't know their minds, but the function is to kill us all, right? I'm very scrupulous about that stuff. And I don't think there's any question that what's going on in Africa and the Middle East with the UAE and Israel is all connected. Informally, but it's all connected, and the people involved know what they're trying to do. I mean, you can see interviews with, Sheikh Mohammed. You can see comments by Jared Kushner. I mean, it's very clear. They're not getting together and whispering in little rooms. They all have the same obvious play, which is to secularize the Middle East through war or commerce backed by America. And that's what they're doing. And I mean, I'm writing another piece about this, in fact, now, less on the UAE and also less on the Middle East, but and a little more about Israel's machinations in Latin America and America. Mm-hmm. But I mean, what we're seeing here is a global push by a bunch of minoritarians who think the only way they can be safe is if they rule supreme. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to get our hands around that. And I think we also, people have different views around this. I think we also need to get our hands around the fact that whatever one thinks of Russia and Iran, these countries are very actively and very consciously fighting for their sovereignty against what Israel is doing, what the UAE is doing, what Jewish Zionists who largely arbitrate our government or who arbitrate aspects of our government are doing. The commercialization, the shock therapy of Russia, the expansion of NATO, a lot of the people who did that, Lawrence Summers, other people, Kenneth Rogoff, they were the same Jewish Zionists who were advancing Israel against Palestine, against Iran. And so, whatever one thinks of the war in Ukraine, for example, whatever one thinks of Iran, these are countries that are fighting against genuinely evil actors right now who we are underwriting. And I think I'm only talking about this on a factual level, by the way. I mean, you don't have to agree that Russia's in the right in Ukraine or that was necessary, or that Iran has, is justified in doing so-and-so, or that October 7th should have happened, to believe that. I mean, I think it's fairly inarguable factually that what we've done is is on a level of evil that means that we need to be very careful before we say, oh, Russia and Iran, these are the axis of fascists, blah, blah. Well, no, I mean, they are responding to what we are doing. We are responding to what they are doing. But I think the only way to talk about this is in a comparative way, where reasonable people may end up disagreeing about who's more in the wrong and not. But I mean, we really need to take a comparative look at this because we are not in the right. I mean, myself, I think we are more in the wrong than these states. And I think we caused these responses by underwriting various things. But even if you disagree with me, I think that's an argument you have to take seriously. And I think and this is where I'll end. I think unless you have another question, one of the worst things in our media, and you can see it everywhere, let's rank the health of democracies throughout the world. Well, Russia's terrible and Iran is terrible. I mean, the amount of nuanced commentary about what goes on in those countries. I mean, in serious places, in the Washington Post and the New York Times, it's really stunning. And even if you think those countries are in the wrong, the information you're being given is still inaccurate. I mean, it's still this broad brush look that absolves the United States, Israel, the UAE. I mean, it's just not an accurate portrayal. And so that really is why I wrote this, to give a different narrative that I think aligns with the facts that anybody can read. And I think pretty much should find a reasonable argument. You might disagree, but it's a reasoned argument.
Yeah, I mean, to back up your point on the evil, I was just reading today from October 7th, 2023 to October 7th, 2025, over 20,000 Gazan children were murdered, over 40,000 were wounded. So just to give you an idea, that's a 2-year period. Also, we mentioned earlier the Sudan mass slaughters that are occurring as a result of UAE backing the Sudan forces over there. So, even more, and then even more irony to take it back to Gaza. It looks like, we're seeing rumors / reports that perhaps, after essentially getting into the Lebanon, our opening salvos killing 168 school children, and that's just one little minor note of the carnage that happened that day. After that goes tits up, and now we're trying to finagle to get Israel to fall in line. Now the rumor is that, which we've seen this happen in other ordeals, multiple times, these sorts of rumors that apparently the rumor is that the Americans are going to give concessions and allow them to sort of have a little bit more freedom of movement in relation to specifically Gaza in return for some sort of backing off. To what degree, we don't even know. Probably will just be symbolic, backing out of Lebanon. I mean, just see all these things, together, you throw all these things together. It's just absolutely insane that we're in this world that any of these people have the gall to refer to Iran as the axis of evil. Absolutely. Like, I'm an anarchist through and through, but I'm sure I'd have all sorts of issues with them. I by no means am caping for Iran, but if you are comparing, it's no contest, I would say. So, but any final thoughts here, Matt? Otherwise, you can let people know where to find you at.
Yeah, oppo-research.com. You can find my full work, and oppo__research at Twitter.
Hell yeah. For those who want to support what I'm doing, leave a like, share, subscribe, comment, leave a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify. You can find the show on YouTube, Rumble, all the major audio podcatchers, and Twitter as well. On Twitter, that's at TowerGangJose. Everywhere else, it's the No Way Jose podcast. If you want to support the show the best way you can do with money over at patreon.com/NoWayJose2020. It's also in the top left-hand corner here. You got a little QR code, brings you to the same place as that URL. Over there, you get a whole host of perks at low level, $2, give you access to early episodes. Do about 1 to 2 of those per week. This is one of them right here. You'd be getting it earlier if you just chipped in $2. And then also, I try to keep 3 to 4 behind the paywall at any given time. Give you guys access to ad-free RSS feed, to the Telegram, the pre-show, post-show, and video calls, and me and Austin's weekly live call and show already dead. I also give a big shout out to the highest level of my Patreon as a big thank you for their support. I have my previous co-host entire gang at Leonard Toad, also at Brigadies, at ZVRCK, at _Invisiel, Tim Tall, at John Klebold, big fan of the show, Tor May, at Wayne Tacos, One Cover Kids, No Free Lunch, Jack, Mark Vestibule, Jacob Wintergard, the Biblical Anarchy Podcast, and John Black, you beautiful bastard. And with that, guys, we'll see you on the next one. We're out of here. Bye-bye.